Let's face it, liberals are offended by everything.
Right on.
And they have zero sense of humor.
Right on.
Huh?
Right on. It's the party game that pokes fun at political correctness and liberalism run amok.
But making fun of them is hilarious for the rest of us.
So play right on and mock the progressive left and their fake news media counterparts in a variety of categories, such as race hustle, the wussification of America, earth snobs, Islam abomination, Hollywood hypocrites, and campus coddling. Feminism follies and rainbow games, and don't forget, millennial entitlement and many others.
Right on, created by conservatives for conservatives.
Because mocking the left feels so right on.
Give the gift of all year long by going to RightOnGame.com.
That's RightOnGame.com. Use promo code MOJO50 for a 10% discount. That's RightOnGame.com, promo code MOJO50 for 10% off.
And while you're there, check out the new drinking game option.
Warning, microaggressions contained in this box. Millennials and snowflakes will be offended by its contents. Retreating to safe spaces are highly recommended.
RightOnGame.com, promo code MOJO50 for 10% off. RightOnGame.com.
You can't handle the truth.
The Denise Simon Experience. The Truth Matrix. Vetting, exposing, drilling down to the truth.
Rolling Thunder, this is Hitman, Seattle. Hitman, this is Rolling Thunder, Seattle.
The Denise Simon Experience. Exposing politics, lies, demagoguery, spin, fraud.
Grid to suppress, Mike Charlie, 4 tree 5, 9er 2-1. Grid to mark, Mike Charlie, 4-7 tree 9er, 8-9er, out.
Promoting individual situational awareness. Question, probe, notice, ask why.
Mark smoke on the deck, 2 rounds AGBT, gas TOT 5-3.
And now, the Denise Simon Experience.
Hey, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Denise Simon Experience. I'm very happy that you could come along for the ride. My buddy over there at the Clarion Project, Ryan Mauro, has been kind enough to join us here on the Denise Simon Experience because something that barely made the news and then just faded away because of all the other crises in Washington, D.C., is the trial balloon of declaring the Muslim Brotherhood a terror organization. So I decided to tap Mr. Ryan on the shoulder and have a little chat about this one, and he has agreed to be with us. So with that, welcome, Mr. Ryan Mauro.
Hey, thanks so much for having me.
Okay, look, back during the Obama administration, somebody put up a White House petition on the White House website, and then I think it needed, 200,000 signatures in order to be considered or have some kind of response from the president of declaring the Muslim Brotherhood a terror organization. Well, it had well over 200,000, and Obama came out and just pretty much said no. Okay, so now we're revisiting it, finally. And I would say it's long past due. We've also heard for quite some time that the Muslim Brotherhood is the mothership of essentially most of the Sharia terror, Islamic militancy that we've experienced in this last several decades or so. Did I get that right?
Yeah, that's absolutely true. I would say the best example would be that the Holy Land Foundation, which was the biggest terrorism financing trial in American history, is known, according to the Justice Department, was set up by the Muslim Brotherhood, managed by the Muslim Brotherhood, as well as Hamas, because they're the same thing. So you have a situation where branches of the Muslim Brotherhood, most notably Hamas, which are openly branches subservient to the Muslim Brotherhood, are banned as terrorist organizations. That they're designated, but then the group that they answer to is not designated as a foreign terrorist organization. So it's really never made any sense. And when the Obama administration responded to that petition that you mentioned, one of the things that they said was that the Muslim Brotherhood is nonviolent. They kind of conceded that they might be extreme, like it wasn't saying, oh, they're all swell and good, but it was like, look, they don't fit the definition of a terrorist organization, they're nonviolent. And that came just months after a press secretary for the White House condemned the Muslim Brotherhood for their calls to violence. So that shows that there's really been a bipartisan deceit when it comes to dealing with the Muslim Brotherhood, where they're not collecting their facts and then also purposely misleading about the facts that they have, because they didn't want to take this measure of designating the Brotherhood the largest Islamist movement in the world as a terrorist group, because there are big repercussions. You are going to have the most powerful Muslim American groups within the U.S. and then also internationally going at you and screaming as loudly as they can, and it's going to be a PR nightmare. But it's worth it, because those guys are the bad guys. Sometimes you have to make the bad guys mad at you.
How many countries have actually listed the Muslim Brotherhood as a terror organization?
I've read 7, but then I couldn't find confirmation of all of them. Like, I've read that Russia banned them officially, but I couldn't find proof of that. But we know that the United Arab Emirates have done it, Bahrain has done it, the Saudi Arabian government has done it, Israel has done it, and it took a long time for them to do it. And that's pretty much it that comes to mind for me. Oh, and Egypt, of course. And that's kind of it when it comes to mind. But what's interesting for me, and this is going to be discouraging, is how so many people assume that this has happened or is like going to happen next week. And if you look at the reports, that's not what's going on. The White House lawyers, the people within the government that have been there for a long time, are going to look at the legal criteria and whether the Muslim Brotherhood can qualify. Then they're going to decide whether they want to do it. And the reason this is being pushed now isn't because Trump got a briefing and like knows the facts, and it's also not because Bolton and Pompeo came to him and said, you got to do this, because they've been in there a while. What triggered this was that Trump met with Egyptian President el-Sisi, who is more of a dictator, and they got along well. Trump was charmed, and Sisi said, you really got to designate the Muslim Brotherhood. And according to the leaks from the people that were there, Trump was like, yeah, that sounds like a good idea. Like he was just like reacting to the Egyptian suggestion because he was having a good time with the Egyptian president. But we also know that Trump flip-flops very quickly when the president of Turkey, an evil dictator, calls him late at night. And he'll switch a position just based on the advice of Erdogan. So until someone tells me that Erdogan has called Trump, told him not to designate the Brotherhood, and Trump has told him too bad, I don't believe it's going to happen. I'm not going to get ahead of myself on this.
I kind of agree with you on all of that. So you've got a partner in that theory. Now,
well, at least there's somebody.
Well, that's, yeah, you have to be a realist, don't you? Can we back up a couple of years, though, Ryan? Did not the UK make some kind of a quasi-designation of the Muslim Brotherhood as a terror organization? They really kind of vastly. I think it was under Prime Minister Cameron. Was that right?
They didn't designate them. They did more than what we've done, at least. They did a review of it, and they basically came to the conclusion that actually publicly they didn't say whether they're a terrorist group or not, but they said they were going to not designate them. And there were some problems with how they described the Brotherhood, and the things that people were upset about got the most attention, but they did call them terror-tied. They did admit that there's widespread criminal activity, that they promote hate speech, that they fundamentally believe in global jihadist conquest, that they're a threat within the UK, and that they've made huge mistakes in their engagement with certain Muslim organizations that they thought were moderate, but were actually Muslim Brotherhood puppets, who then use that engagement with the government, those PR events, to advance the jihadist cause. And that taxpayer money in the UK had gone to Muslim Brotherhood-linked groups. So there still was a big realization on the part of the British that the Muslim Brotherhood a threat and a big problem, but they weren't willing to go along with designating them. And honestly, who can blame them at that time?
Yeah, yes.
You know,
I remember
if you're a leader of Britain and you have Obama out there saying don't designate the Muslim Brotherhood, you're not going to do it on your own.
I remember reading their report, and I think I had to read it twice, and I still wasn't quite sure what the what the Brits did. I think I got the spirit of it, but there was no hard and fact red stamp on their report. So,
there
but
were
you're right.
Recommendations. I don't recall that it actually said, because I think it was basically a study group. So it had some recommendations and you know, it made a lot of good points that work in our favor in trying to educate the Muslim Brotherhood, but it wasn't like a legislative piece that really changes a whole lot, but it gives you a starting point.
Now, how come we have these terrorists, the people that we have listed as terrorists? Obviously, Ayman Zawahiri, al-Baghdadi, Sayyid Qutb, Osama bin Laden. They all really got their start in the Muslim Brotherhood, least of which would be Jamal Khashoggi as well. So it's kind of like there was their KGB school, right?
Yeah, and even in some of the letters that SEAL Team 6 got from bin Laden's compound show that while Al-Qaeda was condemning the Muslim Brotherhood and the Muslim Brotherhood was condemning Al-Qaeda, and so a lot of Americans assumed they wouldn't work together. That's like kind of normal in the jihadist world for two groups to condemn each other, even to kill each other, but then also work together in certain ways. And bin Laden was basically saying, look, there's a huge section of the Muslim Brotherhood that meet our standards for partners. Now, if you meet the standard for partners for Osama bin Laden, then you're pretty bad. And you don't even have to reach that standard to be an enemy of the United States. Like, Hamas is an enemy of the United States. The Muslim Brotherhood overall, even if they're a degree less aggressive than Al-Qaeda, is still a threat to the United States and an enemy. I don't think that they would openly say anything different. But the way that politicians and many people in D.C. judge these things is they say, well, how do they compare to ISIS and Al-Qaeda? And if you're not releasing videotapes of yourself beheading people and trying to carry out attacks right this second within American soil, and you're saying that those tactics are bad, even if you agree with the long-term goals, then you're looked at as kind of moderate. I mean, it's a really pretty low bar that you have to pass to be considered a moderate.
Our little jihad preacher that was struck by a Scud missile, whatever it was, from a drone strike in Yemen, Anwar al-Awlaki. Was he? Did he get? What kind of connective tissue did he have to the Muslim Brotherhood?
There's still suspicions he might have been involved in 9/11, by the way. But Anwar al-Awlaki, I'm trying to remember where exactly he was radicalized, but I know he was in Colorado and he ended up at Virginia. And the mosque that he went to was a Muslim Brotherhood mosque. That's where he led, Dar al-Hijra. And that's where the hijackers were going. And there's declassified documents showing that there was almost certainly, financing to Hamas coming out of that mosque and multiple marriages, all sorts of bad stuff going on. And so what you see happen is that there's kind of a radical jihadi foundation across the United States and the West that the Muslim Brotherhood and other groups set up. And these groups, because they don't want to lose their network, don't carry out attacks. So they set up the businesses and they fund the mosque and they control the scene just like a political party would. And then you have the violent jihadists go to this infrastructure as their starting point, and then that's where they find the people that they need and get the money that they need in order to carry out attacks. And that enables the people who set up the infrastructure that those terrorists use to say, look, I didn't have anything to do with it. Like, yeah, they used our books. Yes, they used our mosques. Yes, they met with our members. But they were doing those attacks on their own. And there's some degree of truth in it, but it doesn't mean that you're absolved of any responsibility for pushing the ideas behind those attacks.
You and I have spoken before about declassifying and putting into the public sphere the Holy Land Foundation trial documents, and I'm just kind of blown away that just has not happened yet in at least 2 years. But then that we're also not declassifying yet another subset of the Abbottabad Osama bin Laden compound documents. We don't have to put them all out. I clearly understand that there's probably some common names in there, but I think in order to necessarily prove the case that some of that needs to happen in conjunction with having al-Sisi cough up whatever evidence that he has in Egypt that would, be a slam dunk. Help me, Ryan.
Yeah, we've got to really revolutionize how the American government provides information to the public, because right now the way the process works is you got to know what you're looking for. But if you're a member of the public, or even if you're within the government, you only know what's on your desk. So how do you search for something that you don't know exists? So you first got to know what you're looking for. You file the Freedom of Information Act request, and it goes to a headquarters. It takes sometimes like 4 or 5 years to get anything. The vast majority is redacted because you have analysts that go through it, and the analysts are overwhelmed, and they have all sorts of legal justifications to get through your request as quickly as possible by blacking out everything. And you can try to appeal it, but you're going to the same government that redacted your request in the first place. And so your only option is to sue, and people don't have the money for that, and that takes forever. So there's tons and tons of classified information that doesn't need to be classified, that just hasn't gone through the system, and the public has no clue about. And that's just, to me, a massive problem. There's got to be some system in place, even just for the sake of transparency and our own freedoms, where just documents, even the most meaningless document, gets declassified at a certain point, and you have to fight if you're the government, you have to fight to keep it classified and out of public view. Right now, it goes in the other direction. There's investigations going on, and everything's basically classified until someone asks for an item not to be classified, and then you hope it works out for you. And that's just a terrible process. And that's why leaks happen, by the way. That's the strength of WikiLeaks, and I hate WikiLeaks. I think Julian Assange is essentially an enemy of the United States. He's like an information terrorist to me. But the strength of his appeal is the fact that people understand there's lots of information that's classified that doesn't need to be. And so they feel like the only way to get information about what's going on is through people leaking things and people stealing things and publishing it.
Ilhan Omar. She has been rather aggressive, assertive, and I might say loud and bold in her solidarity with Palestinian Islamic Jihad, Hamas, and all the rest of them. And the last time she and the White House got into a Twitter spat, a whole bunch of people began donating to her campaign. And I would argue, FBI office up there in Minneapolis, has anybody up there paid attention to, who's donating to her campaign and where those funds are coming from? Because I would say, I think you and I have discussed this before, we have the makings of a second round of terror financing, if you will, fundraising, not financing, but fundraising, propaganda fundraising, militant fundraising, that is going to look a lot like Holy Land Foundation Round 2. What say you?
Well, I'm not optimistic it's going to happen because I was part of an investigation to make that happen. And this was under the Obama administration, but I was involved in an investigation working with the feds on Islamic Relief, which is like probably the largest Islamic charity around the world, and they just raised hundreds of millions of dollars. And I kind of came out as, I guess you could say, a whistleblower about this, about how I knew that a case was put together by 3 government agencies and the Justice Department declined to prosecute, and they wouldn't say why. And they wouldn't tell the agents involved why. And then I came out years later with this story, really just a few months ago, So that opportunity has come. I know Islamic Relief, which would kind of be the focal point for a Holy Land Round 2, that investigation is still ongoing. But for whatever reason, there's an apparent resistance to pulling the trigger on any prosecutions. Now, it's possible that there's a good reason for it. That maybe they're in the process of building the case against many more people, but this has gone on for years and years, so you can kind of always use that crutch for inaction. But the investigation is ongoing. As for whether the FBI is investigating who's financing these political campaigns, we obviously don't know, but even starting an investigation like that is much more difficult than people realize. Mm-hmm. You have to have pretty good evidence of criminal activity or someone indicating they want to do a crime to even kickstart the investigation. And then if you want the investigation to continue, you have to be building towards a case. You have to be getting evidence and then more evidence and then more evidence, leading that has a very good chance of leading towards an actual arrest and prosecution. And if at any point it looks like you're kind of stuck, then the investigation goes away and then it becomes closed and then you're done. So someone saying radical things and even getting money from other radicals isn't necessarily enough to open up an investigation.
How much money is the Muslim Brotherhood getting from Qatar?
Oh, nobody knows. The problem is that the mosques that the Muslim Brotherhood owns are registered as churches in the U.S. So you have no idea how much money is coming in, because a lot of them is cash donations that they don't record who's giving it. Like, I've actually seen advertisements for that. Oh, put your cash here. And then you don't know how it's being distributed, and they don't have to declare very much to the government because the mosque is registered as a church. And then they work with nonprofits who then don't have to disclose certain things like donors, and they're not very transparent as well. So between having those two fundraising mechanisms, then just within the U.S., it's hard to track the money. Now you add in the assets of a foreign government like Qatar or Turkey, who are going to be expert criminals because they have an intelligence service and essentially organized crime syndicates with the government there. They're really going to know how to cover their tracks. So who knows? I mean, my assumption would be that they are either raising or helping facilitate the transfer of hundreds of millions of dollars. I mean, it would just have to be.
Well, this has been a fascinating conversation here. Lots that we have put out there on the table, much to the thanks of your knowledge and good work. So we need to push this thing and see if we can't get somebody like Clarion to send a intelligence report over to the White House so we can begin to light the match on this one. Ladies and gentlemen, big, huge round of applause for Ryan Mauro, Clarion Project. Thanks so much, Mr. Ryan. And ladies and gentlemen, there's more coming your way, so stay with us.
This is Don Newen with Cowboy Logic Radio, and I carry my Sig Sauer 9mm every day. It's like a MasterCard. I never leave home without it.
And I'm glad you do, given that you work in Atlanta every day, talking about a rough place to work.
Well, Donna, I would say that most of our beloved Cowboy Logic Radio listeners not only own, but carry their weapons too. It's just the thing to do nowadays.
So do I, Don. And we need to share with our listeners a fantastic weapons company, Tar River Arms. Oh, and I should mention, they were founded by United States Marine, enough said, right? Badass-o-matic.
TarRiverArms.com. That's TAR Riverarms.com.
Tar River Arms, America's first virtual gun store, makes it easier and more comfortable than ever to purchase your firearm online. And through 3D interactive experiences, you can even view and inspect that gun you're purchasing.
They even have weekly specials that eliminate shipping and broker fees, Donna. Great guns, great prices, and great service. And remember, Tar River Arms is veteran-owned and operated.
Don, would you expect anything less from a Marine?
No, ma'am.
At TarRiverArms.com, you can search by caliber, manufacturer, and firearm types. Revolvers, semi-automatic pistols, including your SIG, Don, short barrel rifles, long rifles, shotguns, and NFA silencers. They even have very hard-to-find products such as the H&K MP5. Totally badass.
Tar River Arms have some of the coolest high-end tactical weapons made, all at great prices.
TarRiverArms.com, U.S. Marine owned and operated.
Hoorah!
Hey gang, did you know that the big cellular companies fund liberal causes and candidates, not Patriot Mobile?
You're correct, Donna. Did you know that the big mobile companies have spent over $100 million to elect liberal candidates? They also fund liberal causes, agendas, and organizations such as Planned Parenthood, not Patriot Mobile.
Here's how it works. You, our beloved Cowboy Logic Radio listeners, pay your cell phone bill every month. Then Big Mobile takes your money and gives millions to liberal candidates who authorize subsidies to provide free cell service, Obama phones, to do-nothings who vote for more liberals so they can keep getting more free stuff that you pay for. Not Patriot Mobile.
So here's how you fight back. Switch to Patriot Mobile with unlimited plans starting as low as $20 a month and stop funding the big cellular companies.
Feel good about funding the right agendas. Every dollar you spend makes a statement. What message are you sending?
And it's easy to switch. You can even keep your same number, and they've got great nationwide coverage that includes Double D Ranch.
Visit them online at patriotmobile.com or call them at 1-800-A-PATRIOT.
And for any of the guilt-ridden liberals, that's 1-800-272-8746.
Created by conservatives for conservatives. Their name says it all. Patriot Mobile. Do it now. patriotmobile.com or 1-800-A-PATRIOT.
Ladies and gentlemen, what message are you sending?
And thanks, ladies and gentlemen, for hanging with us here on the Denise Simon Experience. We had, I think it was a prayer day at the White House, where the president signed yet another executive order giving people, declaring people, and doctors, I might add, the reinforcements that they can practice their religion and their faith and behave accordingly without interference. This is not the first executive order that Trump has signed in this vein. He has also signed those that reinforce freedom of speech on university campuses. So he is certainly doing a lot when it comes to all things First Amendment. Big question is, will all of these work? So what do? I call on Trevor Loudon, my friend, who is an author, a speaker, a very conservative activist, doing tremendous work here, and also a proud producer of documentaries, has his own website, TrevorLoudon.com. So with that, welcome, Mr. Trevor.
Hey, good to be on, Denise. Thank you very much. Good to be here.
You know, there's something that's been bothering me. We have an organization, the National Rifle Association, that has been around a long time, that helps support and defend the Second Amendment. There is another organization called the 10th Amendment Center that does much the same thing to protect the 10th Amendment, but we don't really have any organization supporting the First Amendment, which is kind of why I prefaced this segment with you, that the only person that seems to be kind of doing this right now is President Trump. Do we need to have a formal organization out there that protects all things First Amendment?
Well, I think we do, because, see, it's been taken for granted for many, many years by both sides that the First Amendment is beyond attack. You know, that there hasn't been a need, because even the liberal Supreme Court justices would always defend the First Amendment. And because, you know, they want to protect pornography and they want to protect the left and all that kind of thing. So, yeah, I think that the time has come that we do, because, see, the new narrative out there is it's all about hate speech.
Mm-hmm.
And if something is classified as hate speech, it's no longer protected speech. This is the logic of the left. This is how they're trying to do an end run around the First Amendment. So they've passed hate speech laws in most states now. There's only about 4 or 5 that don't have them, which is absolutely terrible. And these laws were driven by the Maoist communist left to basically restrict freedom of speech. And now they have the moral argument now, or trying to make the moral argument, that there's so much hate in society, and social media is using the same argument. There's so much hate in society, and hateful speech is not protected speech. Therefore, hateful speech can be regulated. And who says what is hateful? Well, the left does.
The Southern Poverty Law Center.
The Southern Poverty Law Center, which is a Marxist communist organization. And they've drawn up a list of a whole lot of groups that they believe are spreading false and hateful information. And these lists are used by social media and mainstream media outlets to shut down conservative speech, shut down libertarians, shut down basically anybody who disagrees with the left. And this is a horrendous situation, because we have always taken the First Amendment for granted. We knew the Second Amendment was under threat, but we always knew we had the First Amendment. Well, no, we don't, and we got to be very careful about this.
You know, social media has really exacerbated the whole issue of free speech, and the right to practice your religion. And it's been slowly fading away for, I would argue, decades that nobody has really paid attention to. We essentially have what is known as constitutional areas. You have to go get a permit to have any kind of a public gathering. You know, we're taking down monuments. You know, we have the whole flag burning thing. You have to pay liability insurance and security fees and all this kind of thing to be a speaker on university campuses. I mean, we're just kind of all over the place. So I would argue we've been slowly losing our rights when it comes to the First Amendment, to the point where nobody's really paid any attention to it except now. Did I get that right?
Yeah, well, I think so. It's gotten so bad now that, you know, people would accept these little infringements. Well, look, remember, say 30, 40 years ago, and I know you're too young for that, Denise, but
yeah, exactly.
Just, you know, your parents or grandparents might remember that. but you know, you know, the Klan, the Ku Klux Klan would march through places like Skokie, Illinois, in black areas as a deliberate provocation. So did they have to get insurance? No. The police would come out and protect them. And the police would come out and keep the protesters away so these idiots could march. And if the Black Panthers wanted to do a march, they could do a march and the police would protect them. See, free speech means nothing if idiots aren't allowed to speak. You know, because if the government draws a line on what is acceptable speech and what is not, that is the end of free speech. Mm-hmm. Because the government becomes the arbiter of what is acceptable speech. I don't support the Klan. I don't support the Black Panthers. But I absolutely believe that if they want to march or speak, the police should protect them. If they hire a hall and Antifa wants to come and try and get the hall shut down, they shouldn't have to pay liability insurance. The police should guarantee them the right to use that hall, just as they should guarantee the Communist Party or the Tea Party or the Democratic Party or the Republican Party or the Flat Earth Society. It doesn't matter. You know, every American has a right to speak freely. And as long as they're not committing an illegal defamation or something like that, which is a deliberate lie, malicious lie, which damages some individual person, they have complete freedom of that, and the police should be protecting them. And, you know, when Milo goes into Berkeley and the event gets shut down because Antifa riots, the police should be there protecting Milo completely, and Antifa should be sent a bill for all the damage they do, and the ringleaders should be put in jail. That's how it should work.
The fascinating thing in the First Amendment, it says it guarantees freedom of expression by prohibiting Congress from restricting the press or the rights of individuals to speak freely. It also guarantees the right of citizens to assemble peacefully and to petition their government. And I would argue almost that very last piece, to petition their government, is the one thing that we gave up. Because I don't find any of the members of Congress or really government that is really helping us protect the First Amendment. If you want to redress your grievances, who in government is even listening or allows that to happen?
Well, that's right. Who do you go to? Do you make an appointment with the president or the Secretary of Justice, or who do you make an appointment with?
Right.
You know, there was a time where you could walk into the president's office and talk to the president. You know,
you could
over 100 years ago. But yeah, there should be a mechanism, like a lot of European countries. They have something like an ombudsman, where you take your grievances to the ombudsman, and most of them are leftist, but it still does correct some situations a lot more cheaply than going to the Supreme Court or something like that. So, yeah, I can see the value in an office like that. You know, where first or Second Amendment, where you can take your any grievance really, you know, and you can have it addressed. You can petition the government to address your grievance, because we live in an imperfect world and an imperfect system, and we must do everything to make sure nobody slips through the cracks, that everybody's rights are protected.
I haven't actually looked at all the language on the declaration or the executive order that Trump signed, but the point where people of whatever stripe are protected from certain or forced actions because of their religion is really a big deal. We don't necessarily have to go back several years ago to what was the little clerk's name in the marriage office, wherever that was, Kim somebody, that she wouldn't put her signature on a marriage license, or the bakers in that lawsuit, or the fact that...
Well, see, this is where I draw the distinction, you know, like in a private business, you should be able to either deal or not deal with anybody you see fit. The problem comes when you're working for the government. So if gay marriage is legal in a certain state and you're a clerk, you have to sign it. And if you can't sign it, you got to get out of that job. But if you're in a private business, and you don't want to deal with homosexuals or flat earthers or bird watchers or nudists or whatever, that's your right, and no one has any right whatsoever to interfere with that. If you don't want to let your house to certain people, or if you know, or you want to have a club that only caters to certain types of people, that's completely your right, and it's none of the government's business. The complication comes when you're working for the government. So I agree with half of what Trump's saying here, but you know, you know, so what's going to happen when a Muslim is working for the government and they have to ship some pork to the local military base and they refuse to do it because it's, you know, it's not in accordance with their religious belief? Well, the answer to that is you're working for the government. You take the government's money, you follow the government's orders, and if your conscience says you can't, you leave that government job. Simple. But if you're in a private sector, you have absolutely every right to make the decisions. That's how I see it.
And so, we mentioned Kim, the little clerk, and we understand that part. And then we had the bakers, but then we also have, even in the public school systems, where kids are told they can't wear a hat, they can't wear this T-shirt. We had the IRS targeting thing, which was clearly free speech. I mean, we haven't seen any of these politicians, regardless of what side of the aisle they were on, that were really, truly standing up for those protections. Most of which, we have that whole women's march thing that happened, where we had those students that were confronted by this cat, and now that they're suing, mass media on his behalf. I mean, Trevor, this is really a very wide, I guess, scandal or chaos. I mean, because nobody trying to define it all is so almost impossible.
Well, because people have lost the distinction between public and private, and that see, in a public school, if you have a government school, they have no right to, and they have a dress code in that school, and you want to wear a MAGA hat or a Black Panther T-shirt or whatever, that's your right. Completely your right. If it's a private school, they can say whatever you like. They can say you can't wear this, you can wear this, you must wear this, you must not wear this. But see, what happened when we had the Civil Rights Act back in the 60s, they passed legislation, for instance, that forbade, private businesses from dealing with people of race, of any race. Now that you could say that's very noble, but it cut across the First Amendment, and that precedent has now been used to corrupt the whole First Amendment area. Look, if you've got a private house, you've got a private bar, you've got a private hotel, you decide who comes in. Mm-hmm. If you only want Muslims in there, that's fine. If you only want, Cherokee Indians in there, that's your right. And if you don't want Apaches in there, that's your right too. But because we compromised, gave the government the right to decide the freedom of speech of private individuals and businesses, which was a huge mistake, done through the Civil Rights Act. It was done to correct Jim Crow laws, but that was a mistaken way of doing it. Now it's so complicated, and the idea of of First Amendment rights is so convoluted now that people can't figure it out. They cannot understand the difference between private and public. And because the economy is so mixed now, most businesses get government money. That makes it even more complicated. Well,
precisely, which is kind of where I was going to go with this whole Chick-fil-A thing, and the San Antonio City Council denying Chick-fil-A a lease after like 2 years worth of negotiations at the San Antonio airport. And Chick-fil-A is a private.
That's completely wrong. That's a public thing. They have no right to dictate if they are pursuing a legal activity. They have no right to deny. If the Nation of Islam wants to set up a halal store at the airport, that's their right. If Chick-fil-A wants to, speak against gay marriage, that's their right. That's nothing to do with San Antonio. But if that's a private landlord, they have every right to make that decision.
So if we had a committee or an organization that worked to protect all things First Amendment, that would be, it's one, we decided it was needed, but it would be a Herculean task. I mean, it would have to be filled with nothing but lawyers, right?
Well,
Trevor?
yeah, like you see, what you got it to me, you'd have to say right from the start, this is only going to protect private sector First Amendment rights, because you don't have any First Amendment rights if you work for the government.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you don't. They're your employer, and you cannot discriminate when you're working for the government. It's only the private sector that has a right to make any decision it wishes with its own resources and its own money. Any decision, no matter how stupid, it's not the government's business. But it is the government's business when it's the government paying the bills. You know, when it's the government. So any public school cannot discriminate, but any private school should be able to admit or not admit or have any policy it wishes.
When you're traveling the country and giving talks and presentations and whatnot, what is generally the reaction when it comes to, what you're trying to impart by your audience? Are they worried, or are they just kind of indifferent? How does that look?
Yeah, they're worried sick. You know, like they are so glad that Trump's in the office, but a lot of them naively thought that, once Trump was elected, the Democrats would do what the Republicans did to them, leave them alone and let them govern. But when Barack Obama was elected, there was no violence against him. But there certainly was when Trump was elected. So they're seeing now the depth of the left and the depth of the deep state. And it's horrifying.
Hence the Kavanaugh hearings.
The Kavanaugh hearings, which really exemplified it. And so now they're freaking out. They're thinking, well, what if Trump doesn't get reelected? What if we don't turn this stuff back? They have seen just how vicious and how out of control the left is. And that's when they're out of power. What the heck would they be like in power now? The mask is off. But people are very, very concerned out there, which is good for us, because they damn well should be concerned, because this next election could be a very tight-run thing, and I think Trump has a good chance of winning it, but it certainly is not guaranteed by a long shot.
No, it indeed isn't. And I would think, if for nothing else, I mean, he's addressed the Second Amendment, and that's good. But the First Amendment, all things First Amendment, I think truly needs to be one of the cornerstones of the arrows in his quiver for his reelection.
Well, I think so. And I think there have to be serious government investigations into Twitter, Facebook, and Google. They are private companies, and they have a right to make policies, but they don't have a right to lie to their customers. And they are lying on a massive scale here. They're committing fraud.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's great room for investigations and shutting them down if necessary, or heavily fining and even jailing some of the executives, because they are working effectively as enemy agents against the American people here, and they are committing fraud on the American people by portraying themselves as a sort of a neutral arbiter of information when they are anything but.
Which is pretty much in a lot of cases where media is now too, correct? I mean, they're
yeah. Yeah, most media is, the most of the mainstream media is now openly to the left, and even a lot of the conservative media is now tilting that way. Fox News certainly is. The Wall Street Journal certainly is. Washington Times even is, to a degree.
Mm-hmm.
So, these are our flagships. And, even if we do have First Amendment protections, if we have no media to express it, they are purging people right now off Facebook for life.
Yes.
Milo got banned the other day for life.
Yep.
Friends, one of the most popular Twitter exponents in the country, Amy Meck, is got banned off Twitter for posting one of my articles on the true identity of the Christchurch mosque shooter, his true philosophy, which is a pro-Russian Duginist, a pro-Russian activist. And she got banned, and everybody else who publishes that article has been banned as well, or suspended was probably the better word to say. So there's very active suppression going on out there.
The burden, I think the kind of the summary of our discussion here is the burden is on the individual to do some research here and really begin to understand all the lanes in this whole First Amendment issue and banning and censorship. And we have to really, truly understand it and then fight back. And then I would say challenge those in Congress that they are not helping to protect us in our free speech in First Amendment.
No, they are not, and they're toying with hate speech legislation, which is completely opposed to the First Amendment, which would destroy free speech in this country forever. Because either they're too gutless or they don't understand actually what free speech is. And free speech is just that. There's no quantifiers here.
Right.
There's no moderately free
Good
speech
word.
or sort of free speech or free speech except for hate speech. That's not free speech. It's either free or it isn't. And if we lose free speech, we lose everything.
We lose it all.
About America. We lose it all.
Woo!
We cannot defend anything. And we've never been in more danger of losing it than we are now. And thank God for President Trump doing what he's doing. And thank God that he's in the White House. But we were given a reprieve in 2016. And we better be using it to our maximum because we don't know that it's going to survive 2020.
Ladies and gentlemen, big, huge round of applause. Trevor Loudon, please visit trevorloudon.com. Mr. Trevor, thank you so much. And ladies and gentlemen, stay with us because there's more coming your way.
Hey, Donna, Cowboy Logic radio listeners love law enforcement.
That's right, Don. And Charity Magnets designs and produces beautiful, high-quality products for law enforcement supporters and enthusiasts.
They've got very impressive honor badge car magnets.
CharityMagnets.com.
They've got license plate honor badges.
CharityMagnets.com.
They've got cool keychains and license plate frames.
CharityMagnets.com. I'm on their website right now, and this is my favorite, the Honor Badge dog tag. Look at that little doggy with the dog tag. He's so cute.
Donna, we're trying to do an ad read, and you're playing around on their website, which happens to be CharityMagnets.com.
But he's so cute.
Donna.
Okay. Hey, this is huge, too. For each sale, a donation will be made to Cops for Kids with Cancer. Cops for Kids with Cancer has given more than $2.5 million in donations. Yes.
Become a Blue Honor Foundation member today. Like Donna is doing right now, go to CharityMagnets.com.
But he's so cute. All right, use the promo code MOJO for $5 off any purchase. I know you all love and support our brave law enforcement professionals and their families. Show your support today by going to CharityMagnets.com and check out that little puppy. He's so cute. Hey, Don, can we go to the pound, get another rescue dog, please? Pretty
No,
please?
Donna, no. 5 rescue dogs are enough, but I'm going to CharityMagnets.com, and I'm making some purchases right now.
Become a Blue Honor Foundation member today. Enter MOJO at checkout and get $5 off. CharityMagnets.com.
Let's face it, liberals are offended by everything,
Right on.
and they have zero sense of humor.
Right on.
Huh?
Right on. It's the party game that pokes fun at political correctness and liberalism run amok.
But making fun of them is hilarious for the rest of us.
So play right on and mock the progressive left and their fake news media counterparts in a variety of categories, such as race hustle, the wussification of America, earth snobs, Islam abomination, Hollywood hypocrites, and campus coddling. Feminism follies and rainbow games, and don't forget millennial entitlement and many others.
Right On, created by conservatives for conservatives.
Because mocking the left feels so right on.
Give the gift of all year long by going to rightongame.com.
That's rightongame.com. Use promo code MOJO50 for a 10% discount. That's rightongame.com, promo code MOJO50 for 10% off.
And while you're there, check out the new drinking game option.
Warning, microaggressions contained in this box. Millennials and snowflakes will be offended by its contents. Retreating to safe spaces are highly recommended.
Rightongame.com, promo code MOJO50 for 10% off. Rightongame.com.
You can't handle the truth.
The Denise Simon Experience. The Truth Matrix. Vetting, exposing, drilling down to the truth.
Rolling Thunder, this is Hitman. See ya. Over. Hitman, this is Rolling Thunder. See ya out.
The Denise Simon Experience. Exposing politics, lies, demagoguery, spin, fraud.
Grid to suppress. Mike Charlie 435-9er21. Grid to mark. Mike Charlie 4739er 89er out.
Promoting individual situational awareness. Question, probe, notice, ask why.
Mark smoke on the deck. 2 rounds AGPT. Gas TOT 5-3.
And now, the Denise Simon Experience.
And thanks, ladies and gentlemen, for hanging with us here on the Denise Simon Experience. In the mess, in the middle of the mess going on in Washington, D.C., I think it was about a week or so ago, one of the presidential candidates mentioned something called democracy dollars. Boy, that sounded great, didn't it? And then it just sort of went away. But we're going to discuss it to see if there is anything really cool about democracy dollars. So, Ethan Blevins with the Pacific Legal Foundation has been kind enough to join us here on the Denise Simon Experience, because as soon as I saw this, it rang a bell, and I think it had to do with Seattle, but he's going to refresh our memory. So thanks, Mr. Ethan, for being with us on the Denise Simon Experience.
Well, thanks as always for having me.
Democracy dollars. Doesn't that sound great?
Well, it's got some nice alliteration to it. It's got a good rhythm. That's about all that's good about it, I think.
A rhythm.
Not bad.
Okay, but it's also going to be very expensive. But we're going to close some tax loopholes, and that's how we're going to pay for it. But presidential candidate Kirsten Gillibrand concocted this idea of having something called democracy dollars, and that's where virtually every registered voter, maybe even those that are not registered, would be given $600. And $600 would go to voters so they can make contributions to candidates. And the candidates can be either those in the House of Representatives, those in the Senate, or those running for president. So it'd be $200 for each. $600 of democracy dollars. So the taxpayers essentially would be then paying for presidential campaigns. Swell, but not so much. So, Mr. Ethan, what's the problem with this whole thing?
Well, there's a few things. You mentioned the expense. I think it would amount to roughly $138 billion if you really gave $600 to every registered voter in the country. Now, it may just be that I think she may say that people have to apply for it or something. I don't know. So it may not be that everybody gets dished out that money. But it's going to be expensive, and it's going to be expensive to administer. That's not even considering how much it's going to cost to administer the program. But the bigger issues are that this kind of stuff does not work. Public funding of campaigns has not changed the political scene at all. It doesn't seem to get money out of politics, which is their supposed goal, et cetera. But I think the biggest problem is just that you can't force a taxpayer to pay for somebody else's campaign contribution. That's just contrary to this First Amendment principle that the Supreme Court just as recently as 2018 reaffirmed, which is that you can't compel somebody to pay for somebody else's speech. We have this sort of individual freedom of mind that we get to decide what we support and we don't support. And the democracy dollar idea flouts that.
And this is kind of like union dues. We all of a sudden become members of a government political campaign union. That's kind of how I see it. I mean, it's like forced into something, right?
It is kind of like that, and it's a very appropriate analogy because the most recent case addressing this kind of issue was a union case called Janus, and the Supreme Court in that context said that people who weren't members of the union couldn't be forced to pay union dues that went to political lobbying and whatever else they go to. And it was that basic idea that you can't be forced to fund somebody else's expression. Of course, tax money is used in all kinds of ways we don't like all the time, but the big difference is that here you're being forced to give your tax dollars over essentially to a private person who decides who they're going to fund, who they're going to donate that money to. And so that's kind of a unique problem. And this has been tried in Seattle and was a failure. And in fact, we're involved in challenging the program in Seattle right now in court.
Okay, so Ethan, I'm going to set up a debate between you and Mr. Darrell West, who's the Vice President and Director of Governance Studies at the Brookings Institute, which is becoming much more liberal by the hour, because he praised this plan. He just thinks it's fabulous and wonderful. The Brookings Institute is I don't know what it is, some kind of a very wealthy, well-funded liberal think tank in Washington, D.C. So if you're going to debate Mr. Darrell West on this whole thing of making donations and having them government dollars, how would you start off that debate?
Well, I think I would start by questioning whether these things work and ask for some evidence that that's the case, because we have been doing public financing of campaigns since the 1970s, basically, and I have yet to see any evidence, and I don't think there is any evidence that these things actually accomplish anything. There's a lot of money involved, but they don't change the fact that it doesn't change the power of incumbency. It doesn't reduce the influence of wealth in campaigning. So I would just ask for some evidence first that these things work. We have a track record that we could look to.
Campaign donations, voting, volunteering are all really First Amendment activities, correct?
Yes.
So having government funds getting involved in campaign activities with stipulations really is putting your toe in cold water here and hoping that they can begin to still infect protections of the First Amendment. Did I overstate that?
No, I don't think so. That's about right. These things are usually, the big argument in favor of them, or at least that I have seen on the legal front, is, well, these democracy dollars facilitate First Amendment values because they help more people have a voice. But that's, first of all, that's actually a misunderstanding of the First Amendment. First Amendment is about individual freedom of mind. The government's not the guardian of the public mind. It doesn't create orthodoxy. People are allowed to think and support the causes they want. And when you're forced to sponsor somebody else's speech, that's a First Amendment violation, regardless of whether it creates. I mean, every time you force somebody to speak, I guess you're creating more speech. But that's the way they defend these things. Is this actually supports the First Amendment, which I think is contrary to what the First Amendment's purpose really is.
I've not heard it described as freedom of the mind in the First Amendment. That's really quite profound. I really like that. So hat tip for that, for sure. Do you believe that at the very beginning by the founders that when they even spoke to any of the amendments or freedoms or I would say protections, that they had even money considered in the First Amendment?
There is some evidence to that effect, certainly. I mean, one of the difficulties always with looking at the original meaning is that circumstances change, but the beauty of something like the Constitution is it's written in a broad enough way to hopefully be flexible as times change. But yes, I mean, they were familiar with the idea of money playing a role in politics, and that is a form of speech. I think money has, admittedly come to play a greater role over the years. But one of the big problems I think that campaign finance fans face is this difference between correlation and causation, right? Because they'll say, well, the NRA gave so-and-so $3 million. And look, so-and-so is voting against a bump stock ban or whatever. The problem there is we have no way of knowing whether the NRA supported him because he had a pre-established, pro-gun record, or he's pro-gun because he was given that donation. And despite this rhetoric about donations, just regular contributions to campaigns affecting policy outcomes, there's actually no real evidence that it does that. Not to say that there aren't sometimes quid pro quo attempts to get a candidate to resist some kind of legislation. But I mean, we're talking about a lot of money donated from a lot of sources to any given candidate. And the vast majority of those are just supporting him because the donor likes those policies, not right, because they're trying to, curry or anything like that. So it's too broad to say we should limit all of those contributions or we should get rid of them all entirely, which I do think some progressive want to do. They want to just have pure public funding. It overstates the case to say that, because it's only a small minority of donors who are actually really trying to do some kind of under the table transaction.
When I referred to money, injected into the First Amendment, certainly there was, hundreds of years ago, but it wasn't federal dollars. It wasn't government money that was the worry. Is that right?
Right.
Okay. So what other points are you going to debate here with, our friend over here, Mr. Darrell West at Brookings?
Well, I mean, so there's a question of whether it works. Another question is how does he think this is going to affect actual elections? This is a kind of circumstance where people with incumbency, people who have a broad name recognition, in other words, people who are already part of the system, they're part of the swamp, so to speak. Those are going to be people who get all this money. The scrappy newcomer is trying to break his way into politics. He's not going to get any dollars. Nobody knows him. So I mean, that's another big issue I have with public funding in general on a program like this specifically is, in my mind, all of that money is going to just end up in the pockets of the guys who already have all the power. And so I'd love to hear a response to that. It doesn't seem to me that there's any talk in progressive circles about the constitutional concerns here. They seem totally unconcerned with taxpayers' rights not to fund speech they disagree with.
And therein lies, I would say, the whole crux of this situation, because I took some of these democracy dollars, and I made a contribution to Kirsten Gillibrand's presidential campaign, because I got and I gave her the whole 200 for presidential candidates, and then all of a sudden she comes out and she says something I don't like. Do I get my $200 back so I can give it to somebody else?
That's a good question. I don't think that there's a refund.
Shucks, come on. And, the same thing would apply for a House candidate or a Senate candidate. Or all of a sudden we find out that there's a criminal case against them. So it's. I mean, are these real dollars? Do you think that they're really speaking of these democracy dollars, or are they just more like a permit or a gift certificate or cryptocurrency?
It'll almost certainly be the latter. So, what they did in Seattle is had like basically it is like a separate currency, and you have to sign it. You have to sign the document. You have to commit it to so and so, candidacy or whatever. I mean, I would, but that brings up a question I would have. If you polled Americans and said, would you rather have $600 to spend on whatever you need it for based on your own best judgment, or would you rather have $600 and only be able to give it to a political candidate? I mean, everybody, of course, is going to say, so the people aren't going to care about this program, is my suspicion. That's what happened in Seattle. Less than 4% of the vouchers were returned. It ends up being a lot of money spent for very low return. And unsurprisingly, the people who returned the vouchers were wealthy, white, and older. So the three groups that progressives seem to hate because of their undue influence in society were the ones who got more influence because of the voucher program. So it's just really questionable whether these things are going to actually work.
In the matter of Seattle, in the matter of Kirsten Gillibrand, the bigger thing, if you stand back and kind of look at this whole thing, this whole, campaign adventure, it really tells you that they truly believe, whether you're at the state level, a city level, a federal level, they have absolute dominion over tax dollars, right?
Oh, yeah. And Seattle, you can tell this from Seattle's response to our lawsuit. It opens with a line, all that plaintiffs are required to do is pay a tax. So it's just a total, the total inability to even feel any sense of concern or responsibility for how taxpayers feel about how that money is spent.
I don't know if I discussed it with you or one of the other lawyers at Pacific Legal, but it's kind of like, when do we get to have taxation with representation again? Because or ever? Will it come in another time in our lifetime? There's so much spending going on at the city level, local level, state and federal, that we have no concept over, much less a voice in. And I would necessarily go to, you have to pass the bill before you know what's in it. And that's really what I'm saying. I mean, democracy dollars, what a ridiculous name to really put on this, right, Ethan?
Yeah, it is an ironic name that I don't think they'll ever quite own up to. First of all, we're not a democracy, and there's a reason for that. And second of all this is going to do is just concentrate hands and more money into the hands of the powerful for the reasons we've already discussed. And the other issue with this is that I don't think anybody would opt into the program. As I was saying before, you can't be forced into the program, which means that the public funding program has to be attractive enough for you to abandon the benefits of just private funding. And here, the FEC's contribution limit for the primary and general election is the contribution limit of primary is $2,800 per contribution, At the general election, it's $2,800 again. And if you agree to accept the democracy dollars, you have to agree to a $200 contribution limit. And I just can't imagine any politician wanting to voluntarily put on that manacle and not be able to raise nearly as much money as they could on their own.
So, Ethan, have you written a letter to Kirsten Gillibrand's campaign chairman and said, hey, stupid?
Well, I'd be more polite about it.
I know you would.
I have not. I think that I'm assuming there'd be a certain amount of futility in that.
I'm being snarky, but I have a habit of doing that. It is, and you know, if it started in Seattle, I'm not sure that it started in Seattle, but obviously what happened in Seattle, that whole seed was planted to even come into Kirsten Gillibrand's political adventure here, that she came out publicly with this. So that whole idea is permeating, correct?
Right.
Ruh-roh.
Yeah, it's already kind of made the circuit of the liberal talking heads, and it's actually kind of an old idea. Seattle was the first to actually get around to trying it, and there's a reason that nobody else had been trying it. And so, I mean, it's kind of funny to see Senator Gillibrand touting Seattle's program as this major success that she's modeling after.
Sounds to me like Seattle's an incubation center for these kinds of things. What a perfect place for it to happen, because you know liberalism is it lives and thrives in Seattle. So that may be the trial city for all of these kinds of things. And that she necessarily kind of liked democracy dollars and decided to go maybe to somebody over there at Brookings, and Brookings kind of liked it too. But thank you for this explanation. At least I think it's not going to go anywhere, and we won't become part of some democracy dollars political voting union. Hat tip to you, Mr. Ethan Blevins. Thanks so much, and to the good work at Pacific Legal. And ladies and gentlemen, there's more coming your way, so stay with us.
This is Don Newen with Cowboy Logic Radio, and I carry my Sig Sauer 9mm every day. It's like a MasterCard. I never leave home without it.
And I'm glad you do, given that you work in Atlanta every day, talking about a rough place to work.
Well, Donna, I would say that most of our beloved Cowboy Logic Radio listeners not only own, but carry their weapons too. It's just the thing to do nowadays.
So do I, Don. And we need to share with our listeners a fantastic weapons company, Tar River Arms. Oh, and I should mention, they were founded by United States Marine, enough said, right? Badass-o-matic.
TarRiverArms.com. That's TAR Riverarms.com.
Tar River Arms, America's first virtual gun store, makes it easier and more comfortable than ever to purchase your firearm online. And through 3D interactive experiences, you can even view and inspect that gun you're purchasing.
They even have weekly specials that eliminate shipping and broker fees, Donna. Great guns, great prices, and great service. And remember, Tar River Arms is veteran-owned and operated.
Don, would you expect anything less from a Marine?
No, ma'am.
At TarRiverArms.com, you can search by caliber, manufacturer, and firearm types. Revolvers, semi-automatic pistols, including your SIG, Don, short-barrel rifles, long rifles, shotguns, and NFA silencers. They even have very hard-to-find products such as the H&K MP5. Totally badass.
Tar River Arms have some of the coolest high-end tactical weapons made, all at great prices.
TarRiverArms.com, U.S. Marine owned and operated.
Hoorah!
Hey, gang, did you know that the big cellular companies fund liberal causes and candidates, not Patriot Mobile?
You're correct, Donna. Did you know that the big mobile companies have spent over $100 million to elect liberal candidates? They also fund liberal causes, agendas, and organizations such as Planned Parenthood, not Patriot Mobile.
Here's how it works. You, our beloved Cowboy Logic Radio listeners, Pay your cell phone bill every month. Then Big Mobile takes your money and gives millions to liberal candidates who authorize subsidies to provide free cell service, Obama phones, to do-nothings who vote for more liberals so they can keep getting more free stuff that you pay for. Not Patriot Mobile.
So here's how you fight back. Switch to Patriot Mobile with unlimited plans starting as low as $20 a month and stop funding the big cellular companies.
Feel good about funding the right agendas. Every dollar you spend makes a statement. What message are you sending?
And it's easy to switch. You can even keep your same number, and they've got great nationwide coverage that includes Double D Ranch.
Visit them online at patriotmobile.com or call them at 1-800-A-PATRIOT.
And for any of the guilt-ridden liberals, that's 1-800-272-8746.
Created by conservatives for conservatives. Their name says it all. Patriot Mobile. Do it now. patriotmobile.com or 1-800-A-PATRIOT.
Ladies and gentlemen, what message are you sending?
And thanks, ladies and gentlemen, for hanging with us here on the Denise Simon Experience. Okay, we're going to, in this last segment, we're going to talk about two things that, again, got just very tiny little bit of headlines. But this one has to do with immigration. And who do I go to constantly when it comes to all things immigration but Matt O'Brien, our favorite person over there, because he just knows everything. He's an encyclopedia and he explains it so perfectly from the Federation for American Immigration Reform. There were two things. There was the ICE's most wanted list in this Ninth Circuit Court's ruling on asylum cases. So poor Mr. Matt. Thanks for agreeing to be with us again on the Denise Simon Experience.
Thank you very much.
I call on you all the time. It's a good thing I don't have your cell phone number. I'd be texting you like a mad woman. But, okay, ICE has always had a most wanted list.
But they have.
Okay. And ICE is really under Homeland Security Investigative Unit. And they really do investigate some fascinating things, I might add, ladies and gentlemen, because they include bulk smuggling cash, child exploitation, art and cultural properties and antiquities theft, firearms smuggling, foreign corruption investigations, money laundering. I mean, they do all kinds of things that probably the majority of people just don't know about. And all of that would lead to having a most wanted list. But ICE just recently added to their most wanted list. Is that right, Matt?
That's correct. So within ICE, there's two separate law enforcement divisions. There's Homeland Security Investigations, and there is Enforcement Removal Operations. And the Homeland Security Investigations officers deal with immigration in addition to all of the other things that ICE is charged with enforcing. The Enforcement Removal Operations officers deal specifically with immigration-related offenses. The Most Wanted list has always had people from both groups of criminals that ICE deals with, immigration violators and individuals who have violated customs rules, nuclear non-proliferation and other weapons of mass destruction rules, all of those kind of things. What's interesting is the ICE Victims of Immigration Crime Engagement Office, which is an outreach office established by the Trump administration in 2017 to help people who are affected by criminal activity perpetrated by criminal aliens, now has a voice in the most wanted list and is helping to add people to that list.
Hence the name. They have like what is called a voice office.
Yes.
Okay. Well, I'm going to put out a snarky thing. So ICE does all these things, and maybe somebody ought to send a memo over there to Kirsten Gillibrand when she thought that ICE ought to be eliminated and or reimagined. But okay, unsnarky. I just unpushed that button. It also has, cyber crimes, obviously narcotics, and all these fascinating things. So, Matt, between the two divisions, I guess, that we're speaking of, is we're kind of ranking these most wanted people, are we not? So, ICE has got to do the investigations, or Homeland Security's got to do the investigations, and then they kind of include ICE, and then they go get these people if they can find them. So we're not just deporting everybody all at once. I mean, obviously that'd be impossible, but we're kind of ranking the robustness of the crime, correct?
That's correct. And what it has tended to focus on is the things that are crimes. So there's always been a few people on it that have violated criminal provisions of the Immigration and Nationality Act, but it has tended toward terrorists, people engaged in big financial crimes that ICE has jurisdiction over, people involved in weapons proliferation, things of that nature. So this is a positive move by the Trump administration to try and make sure that there's an element of this that is always tied to illegal alien bad guys who have victimized American citizens.
And we know about the FBI's most wanted list because, they put posters up in the post office. But we really never knew that there was a most wanted list by ICE, did we? And I would say shame on ICE for that, right?
Well, it's interesting. Most of the federal law enforcement agencies have a most wanted list. Back in the old days when people went to the post office, they were always on a bulletin board in the post office.
Right.
Now, I used to pay attention to them because my father was a police officer, and he would always point it out to me and say, those are bad men, don't be like them, or you'll wind up in jail.
Good advice.
But very good advice. But as time went on and people stopped using the post office, I didn't see much of these unless the agency was forward-leaning in terms of technology and put these things up on a website that was easily accessible to the public, which the FBI did. And the FBI and the U.S. Marshals were always involved with all of the Find the Criminal television shows, like America's Most Wanted and so on and so forth. ICE, for whatever reason, didn't jump on that whole tech and media train early on, but I think it's now realizing that one of the best ways to be able to get the people that it's looking for is to do just that.
That's exactly right, because, otherwise it almost has to be one-way communications where ICE or FBI has to reach out to the public. You can't wait for the public to reach out and go, oh, let's go trot on over to the most wanted. They're just not going to do that. You have to hand it to them. In fact, you almost have to smush it in their nose for them to understand that there are these most wanted lists. And some of these people on here are pretty nasty bad guys.
They are indeed. And it's an interesting thing. As this debate is going on about sanctuary cities, and a lot of municipalities in America are saying that they don't want to get involved in federal law enforcement, at least when it comes to immigration. The fact is there's always been a relatively small number of federal law enforcement officers compared to big city police departments.
Yeah.
New York City Police Department, I think, has something like 30 or 40,000 police officers over and above any of its support staff. So for these federal agencies to complete their missions, it's absolutely essential that they have a good relationship with the state and local law enforcement agencies that are out on the streets in large numbers every day. ICE had a very good relationship with most state and local law enforcement agencies in most places except for California until this wave of sanctuary city foolishness hit the United States after President Trump's election. And I think part of this is a way of using the very compelling stories that people who have been victimized by illegal aliens have to kind of overcome some of the resistance that local communities have towards immigration enforcement, because as you pointed out, these are not nice people. This is not some guy who was looking for a job and happened to wander into the United States and stayed. These are people who deliberately violated our immigration laws, came over the border, and immediately started engaging in criminal activity, which escalated and escalated until you have the types of folks that you see on these lists.
Is this information, we have something called these fusion centers, that law enforcement is allowed to, have some access to whenever they need it, or if not all the time. Is this information both from FBI and or ICE Most Wanted inside those fusion center databases?
It is. The problem with the fusion centers is that most police departments are not set up to process and use intelligence information throughout the departments. Their homicide detectives, their vice detectives may use that kind of information, but unless you're talking about bigger cities, Boston, Washington, D.C., St. Louis, Los Angeles, New York, Denver, the police departments are not used to using the kind of information that we think of when we think of intelligence. So if they have not had a history of collecting and then exploiting that type of information, the fusion centers don't tend to work very well. On the other hand, the fusion centers that have at least one large department that has experience with this kind of stuff and can teach it to other departments, the fusion centers tend to work very well and are very good for making sure that agencies share information.
I'm looking at one particular cat. And it says that Jesus Guillermo Alvarado Serrano, I'll say that 5 times, is wanted for a membership in a terrorist organization, otherwise known as a gang. But I didn't think that, did we actually deem MS-13 as a terrorist organization?
To my knowledge, we have not formally called any of the gangs terrorist organizations. That may be listed that way either because the Trump administration is trying to emphasize the threat that is posed by the gangs, or it may be that the individual is involved with some kind of particular gang that has had ties to terrorism. And, if you work in this field for long enough, terrorists and bad guys, even though you never see this in the movies, you never read about this in the newspapers, have a lot of connections, because the things that terrorists do, like surreptitiously going over borders with contraband, are things that criminals have been doing for years. So if you are with a Middle Eastern terrorist group and you want to get into the United States undetected with all kinds of nasty things to do bad stuff, then your best bet, instead of just doing this until you happen to make it past the Border Patrol, is to go hire one of the Mexican drug cartels, which has been doing this kind of thing for decades. And that leads to a lot of cooperation, collaboration, synergies, whatever hip business word you want to use, between terrorist groups and criminal gangs.
What a mess. It's a mind blow that we haven't listed some of these cartels, because I would argue they've killed as many, if not more, than terrorists have wherever they may be in Iraq and Syria and Afghanistan. That we haven't listed them as terrorist organizations, least of which would be MS-13 or the Zetas or whatever else. I mean, they do rename themselves too from time to time, but especially on the heels of the El Chapo trial in New York that finished a couple of months ago. But then again, we're not listing the Muslim Brotherhood either yet, so whatever.
I'll throw out something completely radical. After having worked in this for a long time.
Okay, I like it. Radical. I like it.
Significant portion of my career dedicated to trying to root out terrorists and deny them immigration benefits. I really don't think that terrorism in and of itself should be some kind of specified offense. If you think about it, everything that a terrorist does is already a crime.
Yes.
they're engaging in murder, they're engaging in destruction of property, they're engaging in kidnapping. Those things are already criminalized. And one of the problems we have with the trials of terrorists is we focus too much on the political element of this, and we inadvertently wind up giving them defenses. I think it would make much more sense to simply say this person is a mass murderer, arrest them, and charge them with mass murder, instead of worrying about what is terrorism, so on and so forth, because that just takes away from the horrificness of the criminal behavior that these people are involved in and complicates the prosecutions and leads to, additional litigation on issues that in any other context are considered well settled when they're just part of a standard prosecution for a crime.
I agree with that. And the same would necessarily apply to crimes against women and or hate crimes, correct?
Yes, and I think the problem you run into with the hate crimes is that an assault is an assault is an assault. We shouldn't be worried about why someone did it, and the minute you cross the line of worrying about why someone did it, then you're into free speech territory. And the fact is, as unpleasant as it may be, it's not illegal to be a bigot or a jerk or have weird political opinions.
We would never have enough prison space for that.
Exactly. And the fact is, those things aren't illegal. We have a very broad conception of freedom of speech here. The distinction is between speech and action. And when you commit a crime against somebody, a crime is a crime is a crime. As a prosecutor, I really shouldn't be worried about what your motive is beyond my showing to the jury that you actually have some kind of motivation to commit the crime. When you watch Law and Order and all these shows on TV, they're always into motive. And the fact is, motive in 99% of crimes is not an element of the crime. The reason you want to show that to a jury is because you want the jury to believe that, Matt O'Brien or Denise Simon committed the crime rather than someone else who is a possible perpetrator. But the motive is not something that you have to establish under the law to a certainty the way you have to establish other facts. And so you get into very messy situations when you all of a sudden say that it's worse because someone assaulted someone because they don't like that person's ethnic group versus they just assaulted an old lady because they wanted to take her purse. I mean, they're both an assault.
Correct.
And we should condemn them equally and let the hammer fall on the perpetrators equally, because we don't want to see people committing violence on fellow citizens in public.
Okay. Good. I'm glad I wasn't thinking way out there in some field that was lost. Thank you for that. Let's switch gears. Let's switch gears and talk about this Ninth Circuit ruling, which played in I think it was brought by the ACLU and the Southern Poverty Law Center about keeping these migrants in Mexico and or putting them back into Mexico while their asylum cases are adjudicated. This was a big decision. Is this a permanent decision or is it a stay decision?
This is not a permanent decision. It was a denial of a request by the well, actually, let me put this a different way. I'm not sure whether it was a denial or an approval because I'm not positive which stage of the legislation it was in. But the government moved and said, hey, listen, if you allow an injunction that blocks us sending these people back to Mexico, we are going to suffer irreparable harm because there will be thousands, possibly hundreds of thousands of aliens who have to be released in the United States. We may never find them again, and we may never have an opportunity to fully examine their asylum claims. So this is a fantastic ruling. It's shocking to me that the Ninth Circuit ruled this way because the Ninth Circuit is incredibly anti-Trump. It is incredibly pro-illegal alien and pro-open borders, and it's noted for its judicial activism. So it was really kind of mind-blowing that they ruled in this fashion.
So, Matt, the word that you used was harm, and the harm has a very wide reach in this particular case because we just spoke about ICE and the work that they have to do. They clearly don't have enough people to do what they're already doing, but then they'd have to go find all these cats that have just scattered across the United States if there are additional questions about their asylee case, and we can't do that. Plus, you'd have to increase the size of the agency exponentially if you didn't have these people in Mexico or put them back into Mexico. Now, that puts a lot of burden on Mexico too. So where are we with this? Is this going to be appealed, or give us your thoughts on what happens next after this Ninth Circuit Court ruling?
Well, there's a couple of different things that happened. The Ninth Circuit can just decline to take this up again. The Southern Poverty Law Center and the American Civil Liberties Union could ask for an en banc hearing. I'm not sure of the procedural posture of the case, so I'm not sure if that is an option with this specific decision, but in that case, they asked for more judges on the court. The whole entire number of judges in the circuit to sit and rehear the case. The Ninth Circuit is very fond of those. When you happen to get a centrist and a couple of right-leaning judges on a three-judge panel, they then do an en banc hearing and reverse themselves. So this case has been all over the place, and I am not positive of exactly what position it was at. But the main thing to keep in mind is, regardless of the mechanism for it being overruled, this was a simple ruling on whether the injunction banning the Trump administration from sending people back to Mexico could continue. They haven't reached the case on the merits yet, so they have not considered the law in general, the asylum law, and how the Trump administration is acting under it. Now, I have a sneaking suspicion that the trial judge in this case was probably looking solely at the order sending people back to Mexico and not looking at the larger picture. And under Trump v. Hawaii, which was indeed the travel ban case, the Supreme Court looked at this and said that 1182F, the provision that gave Trump the power to put a temporary moratorium on travel from certain countries that had terrorism problems, it is nothing short of a provision which allows the president to impose restrictions on foreign nationals that are not otherwise in the Immigration and Nationality Act. So that's exactly what the president did here. He said, listen, we're overwhelmed. We're facing a crisis, and for legitimate reasons, we need to tell these people to go back to Mexico and await their asylum claims there. It would be extremely difficult in the face of the Trump v. Hawaii ruling for the Ninth Circuit to rule differently than that and say that there is something which prohibits the Trump administration from doing this. However, the Ninth Circuit does not inhabit the same world that we all do, and engages in some very suspect legal reasoning in a lot of these cases so that it can wind a tortuous path to the social justice outcome that it is seeking. So despite the fact that if you were looking at this in another more traditional, more rational circuit, you might be able to expect that the suit would simply be dismissed on the merits. That may not be the case in the Ninth Circuit, and it may be necessary for this case to go forward to the Supreme Court. If that happens, then I would feel fairly confident in predicting that they're going to point to Trump v. Hawaii and say, listen, we already resolved this issue. The facts here are not that distinct from the travel moratorium. We're ruling in favor of the president.
Who on part of government argued this? Would it be the Solicitor General out of the Department of Justice before the Ninth Circuit?
Before the Ninth Circuit, in this situation, it was probably somebody from the U.S. Attorney's Office from the Civil Division. The Solicitor General typically will only argue cases before the Supreme Court.
Supreme Court, okay. Well, now we have to load up a bunch of airplanes, do we not? Get ready to send some of these people to Mexico. What is Mexico going to do with them? so that I would argue in some cases they're going to hand some of the issues over to the State Department and our Treasury, because now we're going to have to go give Mexico some subsidies, some stipends to pay for these people, right?
Well, that's not abundantly clear, because Mexico has an obligation under international law to stop these people and determine whether they're entitled to asylum in Mexico. And here's the interesting thing. The Mexican government actually has offered these people long-term residence and work authorization, but they have said, no, we don't want that. And, my grandmother always used to tell me when I was a little kid, beggars can't be choosers. And that is an effective legal principle when it comes to, I know, parenting has changed, but that was reinforced for me, and I think was a good life lesson, because one of the fundamental principles behind asylum law is if your country is falling apart, you need protection. That's legitimate. But when you go hand in hand begging for protection, you don't set the terms. The country that is giving you the protection is the one that sets the terms. There's another interesting concept which is not completely developed, and in most cases it has to do with intra-country agreements, but it is something that is developing in asylum law. And that principle says that you're obligated to seek asylum in the first safe country that you come to. Now, that is not something that we could go in an international court and argue that Mexico is failing to do that, because right now we don't have an agreement with them about safe third countries. However, I think in the next 10 or 15 years, you're going to see that insinuate itself into international law as a fundamental principle, and that will wind up being something that countries like the U.S. can say, hey, listen, you traveled through 6 countries on the way here.
Right.
Therefore, we don't have to give you asylum.
Big, huge round of applause to Federation for American Immigration Reform, and to Matt O'Brien, my go-to person. Thank you so much for all of this. I mean, we learn something every single time you're with us. And ladies and gentlemen, we're very happy that you were along for the ride, and we'll see you again very soon.
Hey, Donna, Cowboy Logic Radio listeners love law enforcement.
That's right, Don. And Charity Magnets designs and produces beautiful, high-quality products for law enforcement supporters and enthusiasts.
They've got very impressive honor badge car magnets.
CharityMagnets.com.
They've got license plate honor badges.
CharityMagnets.com.
They've got cool keychains and license plate frames.
CharityMagnets.com. I'm on their website right now, and this is my favorite, the Honor Badge dog tag. Look at that little doggy with the dog tag. He's so cute.
Donna, we're trying to do an ad read, and you're playing around on their website, which happens to be CharityMagnets.com.
But he's so cute.
Donna.
Okay. Hey, this is huge, too. For each sale, a donation will be made to Cops for Kids with Cancer. Cops for Kids with Cancer has given more than $2.5 million in donations. Yes.
Become a Blue Honor Foundation member today. Like Donna is doing right now, go to CharityMagnets.com.
But he's so cute. All right, use the promo code MOJO for $5 off any purchase. I know you all love and support our brave law enforcement professionals and their families. Show your support today by going to CharityMagnets.com and check out that little puppy. He's so cute. Hey, Don, can we go to the pound, get another rescue dog, please? Pretty
No,
please?
Donna, no. 5 rescue dogs are enough, but I'm going to CharityMagnets.com, and I'm making some purchases right now.
Become a Blue Honor Foundation member today. Enter MOJO at checkout and get $5 off. CharityMagnets.com.